Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the others great millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwatham that listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick Lord's Will, as always, an edifying lesson. And I just wanted to read through this article, a little bit of this on AlJazeera.com, and what I'll probably will do is link it in the link it in the description down below. And basically, it goes into the U.S. House passes 1.15 trillion military bill expanding Israel cooperation. So the bill to fund war with Iran, a handful of Trump's priorities, passes largely along party lines, faces Senate uncertainty. So it says here, and it's dated yesterday, Republicans in the United States of the House of Representatives have narrowly passed a massive $1.15 trillion military spending package. Despite concerns from Democratic lawmakers over the price tag of enhanced military technology, collaboration with the state of Israel. It says the bill passed in the House on Wednesday by a margin of 216 to 212, largely adhering to party lines, with an exception of 6 Democrats who voted in favor and 7 Republicans who opposed it. So let me just check this out. So here it says in 2027, the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, is a reflection of the President Donald Trump's request for an enormous increase in the country's already unmatched military budget, seeking to boost spending from $900 billion last year to $1.5 trillion. So basically they increased it, right? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the United States has the biggest military budget in the world. Let me just look that up. Which country has the Okay, so yes, it is the United States. So originally it was from what's it called? $954 billion. So now that budget has now increased to 1.15 trillion. Not even a Russia is Russia is 190 billion, and China is 336 billion. So it's not even, America is pretty much up there when it comes to their spending, spending on war. So continuing on, so it says Trump has said to increase it is necessary as U.S. fights widely unpopular war on Iran launched by the U.S. and Israel in late February. So basically, there is a merging of the military now, right? And a lot of American citizens are absolutely not okay with this. You remember, I don't know if you brothers and sisters remember this situation. Not too long ago, there was that soldier that was basically he was mistreated and he was escorted out of a building, and he constantly he exclaimed, no one wants to fight for that state, and then some police officers, they tried to take him out. I believe it was a courtroom, if I'm not mistaken, and then his hand was broken, right? And then there's also that distaste of how America treats a lot of their soldiers, and then there's a lot of information, knowledge being increased, especially in regards to you know how America treats their own men of war. Let me actually start. Let me start with that actually, and then I'll continue on reading. Let me see if I can find that actually. Is that Sirach? Is it 26? One second. Okay, here it is. Sirach chapter 26, verse 28. And it says, "There be two things that grieve my heart, and the third maketh me angry. A man of war that suffereth poverty, and men of understanding that are not set by, and one that returneth from righteousness to sin. The Lord Yahweh prepareth such and one for the sword," right? So the nature of what's going on in America right now is that the way that they treat their vets, their men of war, is not an honorable sense. And a lot of them, there's a growing U.S. Vet population in basically in poverty. They're not taken care of. They're strung out. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's a growing problem. Like you're spending a lot more money in regards to actually funding a war, but you're not actually taking care of your own citizens, right? So let me go, right? And a lot of Americans, there's a lot of, and this is another point I wanted to make as well, actually. There's a, let me get that in Isaiah, actually. Just bear with me. This is Isaiah 19, verse 2. And it says, "And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight every one against his brother, every one against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom." So there's going to be a lot of division between the American people. So there's a lot of them that they have a mindset of, okay, America, our interest should be first. Our interest, should be at the top priority. However, when a lot of American people, they elect these these people into positions of power, they realize that there are certain organizations that might put forth money into the politicians' hands, and then they realize their politicians are not really for them. They realize that their president is not really for them. They're actually pushing the agenda of that state. Their interests get put at the top, right? So essentially what I'm saying is there's a foreign entity whose interests is superseding the American interest, and that's creating a very strong divide within the American people. So they realize, okay, they're kind of getting the short end of the stick. They're getting the crumbs as opposed to getting the whole cake. And a foreign entity is actually getting the crumbs, they're getting the napkin, they're getting the forks, the knives, they're getting the whole full course meal. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying that in a parabolic sense, but hopefully, this you grasping the idea, right? So let me actually get this let me go to Proverbs actually. Proverbs 25. Proverbs 25, verse 19. And it says, confidence in an unfaithful man in a time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. So now the politicians, they are the ones who are seen as people who are unfaithful to the American people, right? And a lot of even our people as well, because when you actually think about it as well, when you go back into the Torah, really and truly, we're really supposed to have the interests, and we're supposed to have somebody of our own kin really ruling over us. We're not supposed to be having heathens ruling over us, and that person should be instructed in the ways of the law. Right? We're not supposed to be having, this is America, man. This is a line of captivity. This is we're subject to payments. This is not a place to rest, because there is no rest within a society like this. And this is something that our people don't understand, especially the ones that are kind of more like on the what's the word I'm looking for? The American, America first. I'm a so-called Black American or Latino American. Like, look what they're doing to your people, but people turn a blind eye to these things because they think America is basically like the rest of their homeland, right? So let me continue reading on, and then I'll go to the prophecy. This is let's see here. It says, in the 2027 NDAA also attracted scrutiny for a measure that would expand military cooperation with Israel, despite growing support among voters for ending the military assistance to Israel, right? So, that's that division, especially amongst American people, because American people, they do, you know, they're realizing, okay, gas prices, they're in a hard time where essentially they want a president that's caring for the welfare of their own, as opposed to all in these other countries, especially within that state, funding their military support, right? you know it's kind of like, for example, if you have a son, right? If you have a son, and as a dad, you're actually paying more attention to the neighbor's son rather than your own son. You know what I'm saying? That's basically kind of what it's like. So it says here, the bill now faces uncertain future with the Senate, where Democrats are likely to obtain to the high cost at time when the White House is moving to slash access to social programs. It says Senate Democrats blocked a debate to the NDAA in a vote last week, with Democratic Minority Leader Chuck Schumer calling it a permission slip for the war on Iran. Right? The state of Israel, they want to essentially establish their so-called greater, Israel, project, right? But they're doing that, they're trying to, they're trying to fulfill that in a very corrupt way, what they're doing to the people in Gaza, and the whole world is basically making is seeing the after effects of them trying to do this, what they're doing to the people, the so-called Palestinians, to people in Lebanon, right? So they're basically causing a strong problem. You know what I'm saying? Even their own people, when their own people go and they travel to different countries, it's a growing sentiment. When they go to different places, they're basically there is a distaste, for them being within their space. So let's see here. Let's go to Jeremiah 49 verse 20, and it says, "Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord, and that he hath taken against Edom, and his purposes, and he that hath proposed the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them." So, this small state, this very young state that I'm referring to is pulling all these nations, into what the scriptures describe as the third woe. One woe has passed and the third woe cometh essentially quickly, to roughly paraphrase. This little state is pulling all these other nations, into, that war, right? So all these things are essentially meant to happen, right? So the little state here is pulling, especially the United States, into that war, right? And then on the other side, you have other nations where, when you go into Ezekiel 38, there should be, there's a list of nations that are basically, mentioned there. You have Russia, which is known as Gog, right? Persia, Libya, Ethiopia, and those nations are going to be guarded by Russia, along with other countries such as Turkey. You have China, and then you have a lot of those smaller nations that are very, like, they may not have been seen as much of a essentially as a threat, in past times, but now they're able to basically kind of flex their military muscle because they have, access to nuclear weapons. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of these nations are gearing up, for war. They're not in a time where, okay, they're basically trying to promote, prosperity and stuff like that. That there's a mustering of the battle that's going on here, right? The nations have that mindset, gearing up, for war. This is hold on. This is Joel 3 and 9, and it says, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war and wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near, let them come up." It says, "Beat your plowshares into swords." So plowshares are basically, weapons of agriculture. So taking those, taking the resources you would normally do to invest in agriculture, okay, let's start pushing it into swords, representing today as these guns and military might and nuclear warheads. Let's actually invest in this, because there's a mustering of the battle that's essentially, taking place within these times. And it says, "And your pruning hooks into spears, for let the weak," it says, "let the weak say, I am strong." So these are the nations that, they were not seen as much of a, essentially, I don't want to say as a threat, but they were not seen and taken very seriously. They're kind of more, showing their military might because they have that ability to actually do so, through nuclear access to nuclear weapons, right? So, that's pretty much it. This is these are things that are just happening. That's pretty much the basically the end of the article here. it's just very, very interesting that all these things are happening, right? So I figured I would just end off with this precept, because if there is anything in these times, is mercy is one of the things that we strongly need, right? This is Habakkuk 3 verse 2, and it says, "O Lord, I have heard thy speech and I was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years, and in the midst of the years make known in wrath, remember mercy," right? So all these things are happening together because it's Bible prophecy, but Lord, to have, as the judgment comes down, because a lot of those, you know what's it called, a lot of those soldiers are going to be shipped off to fight in a war, and to basically be as a sacrifice. You know what I'm saying? The scriptures talk about how women shall mourn having no husbands, to roughly paraphrase, daughters nor helpers and stuff like that, because a lot of them are going to go into that war and fight, lose their lives, right? So but for us, other, the hopeful elect, in these times, it's just, for asking the Lord, remember to basically remember mercy upon us, in these times of judgment, right? So anyways, I just thought I would just do, a quick one, just, explaining, going into this. Lord's will, this lesson is just quick and edifying. So I'd like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.